To me, I go rather quickly through this lesson as this is one that I don't spend a lot of time practicing for two reasons. We've already graphed inequalities. We did that in chapter 6, so the process for that isn't new. And we've already spent a bunch of time solving systems, and so we know it's where things intersect. And so all we're going to do is put those two together today. But if you notice, you're finding the solution to a system of inequalities by looking for the intersection. And what you're doing is looking at where the shading is at, or where the shading overlaps. So during your warm-up, I told you to shade lightly, and that's exactly what you need to be doing. For those of you that only work with 10, you're at a little bit of a disadvantage unless you find two different colored pens. All right? Yeah. Let me put the chair on the floor. Thank you. All right, so we need to graph each inequality on the same coordinate plane. Just like when I give you a system of equations, you put both equations on the same graph. We're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to graph the first boundary line. Remember to use a dashed line if it's just less than or greater than. Use a solid line for less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So ladies and gentlemen, those of you that couldn't answer that question correctly during the warm-up, have I reviewed it for you here? Yes. So there's no reason to get it wrong unless you refuse to use your notes. You're going to test a point not on the boundary line. Which point do we recommend testing?
0, 0, 0.
And then lightly shade. So if 0, 0 is true, you're going to lightly shade over 0, 0. If 0, 0 is false, you'll lightly shade on the other half. Then you're going to graph the second boundary line. Once again, I remind you when to use solid and when to use dash. And then testing that point is still going to be 0, 0. Once you've lightly shaded that, your solution is where the two shadings intersect, where they overlap. And so you can then darken it in if you don't think it stands out that much. But I don't need like charcoal drawing shading on there. Does that make sense, ladies and gentlemen? If I pick up your paper, I don't want to have graphite on my thumbs, okay? I don't need it to be that thick. If those of you who would like to use colored pencils or markers, in the back cabinet, and I'll open it back up, there are some colored pencils, markers, crayons back there. Otherwise, just some highlighters usually work pretty well. So let's take a look at our first example and then go through there. All right, we have y is less than x plus 3. The nice thing about this is it is already solved for y. All right, so for this one, I'm going to put blue next to it so we know that I've got my blue, that's our blue line and our blue shading. So I'm going to start at positive 3. Now, ladies and gentlemen, those of you that graphed the warm-up wrong, get out your graphic calculator and type this in. There are no excuses other than laziness for getting these wrong. Do we get that? You have a tool. Yes. You know how to use it. If you put the wrong y intercept because you put it on the x-axis, shame on you for not graphing it. Those of you who did a positive line instead of a negative line because you went in the wrong direction, shame on you for not testing that. So if you don't know how to graph this, start using your tools. This has a slope of 1, so I'm going to go up 1 over 1. It's going to be a solid line because I have the equals to. So this line, guys, tells you to connect it. If you don't have that line there, then you... And so we connect them. So that line is going to help us there. You need to use the edge of your calculator. You can do that. Once you start on your homework tonight, the rulers are in that same back cabinet. I need to test, ladies and gentlemen, it's graph, shade. Graph, shade. Do not do both graphs and then try and shade, because those of you that don't have two different colored writing utensils, it's easy to mix up which one we're looking at. So we're going to graph, and then we're going to shade this. When I plug 0, 0 in, I get 0 is less than or equal to 0 plus 3. That gives me 0 is less than or equal than 3. Is that true or false? True. So if 0, 0 is true, what does that mean about our shading? It's going to go below that line. It's going to be over 0, 0. Lightly shade. I should not hear your pencils. Pens are a little bit more difficult. But lightly shade. Now for our second one, ladies and gentlemen, what am I going to have to do before I graph? Solve for y. So CJ, what would be my first step in solving for y? Minus 2x. Ladies and gentlemen, I have seen some of you add y to both sides, and that's fine. I like that. You just need to get x and y separate from each other. What do I have to do to finish this up now? Divide by what? Divide by -1, and I'm glad you said the negative there. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when I divide by a negative, what happens to that inequality? It flips. It's going to become the opposite. So this less than becomes greater than. So I actually have y is greater than -5 plus 2x. Let's see if I can move this around. All right. So here's what we're. What's a negative divided by a negative? Positive. Is that what you're asking, Hunter? Oh, okay. Sorry. You said something out loud, so I was trying to answer your question. Sebastian, where am I going to start this graph at? The -5, and we start it on the y-axis. This is why, guys, you need to shade lightly, because if I shade it really dark, you cannot even see my -5. So shade lightly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then my slope is 2, so up 2 over 1. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what do we notice is happening here on this graph? They're not even intersecting, are they? And that's okay, because it's not the lines that are important here, ladies and gentlemen. It's their shadings that have to intersect. So it's okay if I don't have my two lines intersect in the same graph. Dashed line, so I should see your dashed line here. And now I need to test 0, 0. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to beg that you test in the original equation. And here's why. If you forget reversing the inequality because you divided by that negative, your answer for your test is going to be wrong. But if you put it back in the original equation, we're going to get a correct true or false, the right true or false statement each and every time. But if I didn't flip this inequality, it'd be a completely different statement. So always go back to your original equation. I get 2 times 0 minus 0 is less than 5. So this whole left side became 0. True or false? 0 is less than 5 is true. So that means I can shade over 0, 0. So ladies and gentlemen, where do these two lines actually intersect their shading at? In between. So you've got a couple of options. Because I can erase, I like to erase the extra shading I have on here. For those of you who are using pen or marker, you don't have that option. So then what you need to do is just darken in between those two boundary lines. And that's why I call them boundary lines, ladies and gentlemen, because you're not going to darken in outside of either one of those lines. So please make sure you kind of use them. Kind of like in kindergarten, they tell you to color inside the lines. We're going to color inside those lines. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions? Yeah, it kind of looks like a little funnel that we're going towards. Let's see if we can do this the right way. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the next one. Let's just review real quickly what it means to have x by itself. When we have x by itself, it means it goes only through the x-axis, and it's going to go through the x-axis at -2. It's going to be a solid line because I have the line under there. All right, so if it was y by itself, we would have the horizontal line, but because it's x, we have just we have our vertical line. I want to show you guys another option for your shading that might help some of you that don't like messy papers. I need to shade x is greater than -2. Some of you automatically know that. What direction do we go for greater than -2? To the right. Okay, if you need to test 0, 0, is 0 greater than -2? Yeah, that's a true statement. But I'm going to shade to the right. But instead of shading, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw these arrows. And so what that tells me is the direction my shading is going in without having to put a bunch of scribbles on my paper right now. Does that make sense? So I'm showing which direction the shading is going to go. It helps me keep my paper a little bit neater. It's going to help me see the overlap. So this is just a second way of doing your shading. If we take a look at the second equation, they already have it solved for y. So we're going to start at positive 1. And then we're going to go down 2 over 3. Down 2 over 3. I'm going to go up 2, back 3. Up 2, back 3. It's a solid line once again. Now remember guys, my lines don't intersect at a nice curve, but it doesn't matter. Because I don't care where the two lines intersect, I'm interested in where the shading intersects. So I still need to, for this blue line, test 0, 0. So I'm going to take 0 is less than or equal to . The nice thing about plugging in 0, 0, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that everything except the constant becomes a 0. So this left-hand side is a 0. This right-hand side is just positive 1. Is 0 less than 1? True. So I'm going to shade over 0, 0. So I'm going to shade below the line. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm still going to want you to actually shade in your graph. The region that I pick is the region that has both sets of arrows in there. So if you guys notice, once we intersect our lines, we kind of create 4 regions. All right? Which of my 4 regions am I going to end up shading in? Based on the numbers I put up there, guys. Which region has both arrows in it? 1 has absolutely no arrows in it, correct?
Right.
How many? I've got blue. Do I have any green arrows in region 2? No. But when I look at region 3, do I have green and blue arrows here? So that's where we're going to put our shading. Region 4 had no blue arrows, but it has green arrows. I still can't use it. It has to have both sets of arrows. All right, guys? That's just another option. Could you still do it the way we did the first one, where you do all of your shading at the beginning? You sure can. All right? Ladies and gentlemen, you have it on your own. When you get that done, raise your hand, and I will come around